Okay, we're in Isaiah. If you'd like to go ahead and open up your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 4. So Isaiah is one of those overwhelming books that we've started into, and it seems like that, there's so many wonderful passages about it. Around Christmas, a lot about the baby Jesus, around the Lord's Supper, around crucifixion. There are so many. Isaiah is writing about 140 years before they're going to be taken off into captivity. The kingdom has been divided between the north and the south. The south is Judah. That's where he is prophesying from. He is probably of royalty, somehow associated with it. Scholars have determined that looking at his language and such, he is of that royal descendancy. He has a language, the way he articulates his visions and such. In this is an amazing book. It is the largest, but it also has so many powerful imagery. And there's a lot to be said. We went over on Wednesday nights, the intertestament period where the 400 years of silence and how that there was no prophets. And that question I get asked sometimes is why? Why not? Why was there no prophets, all the way up until Jesus came? And my kind of quick comment or answer is, he said it all. He has said it all. And so all we would get is a bunch of prophets just telling us the same old thing about how the people are falling away from God and that God tells them how to make their lives right with him. And that's what we would have. So what we have, really, especially when it comes to Isaiah, is the kind of the meat of what God is going to show the future. But he's also speaking to the people in a very immediate role as well, because he's talking to them about their spiritual condition and the coming judgment. So as the book opens up, the first 5 chapters are dealing with this judgment. And I love the way he starts. He calls nature itself to come and to testify and be a witness. I mean, what greater witness? If you're going to call a witness, you want somebody who has actually seen it, right? That's a witness. And so God himself calls nature. He calls the world's natural world to come and to witness because nature has seen what they're doing. So we're going to jump in at chapter 4. Now, again, always remember that these books have been divided into paragraphs and chapters and verses and stuff by somebody thousands of years later. Isaiah did not divide these into the chapters that we read them from. So we're jumping in kind of in the middle of a part of the curse and the judgment that God is putting upon him, especially chapter 4. Chapter 4, short. It's just 6 verses. But it really is the cliffhanger. It's a part of the previous. So from chapter 2 to 5 is really the whole message of what God is bringing against, what God is declaring to everyone why he has to bring this judgment about them. And he describes the social, political, economic conditions that they are doing. And that sets the charge for why he's able and what he's going to do to them. But the beautiful thing is, very seldom do you have somebody who is bringing, like a prosecutor, is going to bring charges against you that ever gives you any hope. They're not going to tell you, if they bring murder charges against you or somebody, the local prosecutor, they're not in the middle of it go, yeah, but you know what, this is going to be a good thing or whatever. There's never, no. The prosecutor that comes out against you is going to bring every dirty thing about you, try to make you look horrible, stack a bunch of extra charges, right? In case one doesn't stick, they'll stack 10 charges on top and take you to trial and then try to get you convicted. And so God is building that case. He's bringing those charges. But what's amazing about God is it shows how much he loves us, because in the middle of all of it, he always shows that there's a bigger plan. There's something more magnificent going on. And I'm not just coming in like the big dad, I'm going to whoop you and spank you and punish you because you're bad and I'm dad. But the fact that it's righteous, it's right. It's the right thing for me to do for you. And if I don't, then there's no hope at all if I don't. One, I prove myself a hypocrite because I have declared a standard. And so that's a part of these first chapters. Chapter 4 is unique because in a lot of ways, even though it's only 6 verses, it's going to open up a lot of those subtopics in this little short verses that are going to be expounded throughout the book. There's 66 chapters in this book, yet in these little verses here, he is going to hit some things that are just going to explode in major topics later on as he goes through the book. So some of the key things in this that he's going to bring up is he's going to talk about the judgment that leaves the land desolate. In other words, it's thorough. He's going to talk about the beauty and the fruitfulness of the branch of the Lord. Right in the middle of all this, remember I told you about the prosecutor and how he always comes in, but it's a necessary, but he says he's going to cover this idea, this beauty of the fruitfulness of this branch of the Lord. The purification and restoration of Zion. This has to be. It has to be. That's what he's going to do in verses 3 and 4. And then 5 and 6, the last part of it is God's divine presence and protection over his people. Does this sound, you could take those. And this, if you take these 4, this is the book of Isaiah. Right there. This is going to cover the rest of the book. So it's kind of like the table of contents for what the rest of the book is going to do. And so we start out looking at this judgment and this desperation. And that's one of the things that we started last week when we looked at the other in chapter 3. And that's why I mean, this is one of those terrible splits because the last part of 3, he is talking about in that day. And he's going to be staying in the first verse here about in that day. There is a day, which means in the future, that's some day that's coming. And back in 3:18, he talks about, and he goes through, and I love the way he lists all these wonderful things of material life that you're enjoying. He goes through and he says the finery of anklets, headbands, cressets, pendants, bracelets, and he lists it like that, scarves, headdresses, armlets, sashes, perfume boxes, amulets, signet rings, nose rings, festival robes, mantles, cloaks, handbags, the mirrors, the linen garments, the turbans, the veils, perfumes. And he says, they'll all be rottenness. What does that sound like? It sounds like a nation that has become so materialistic that that's what they love. They love those things, the material world. But he's going to turn everything upside down. Instead of the beauty of the hair, he's kind of insinuating in verse 24, chapter 3, about this idea of setting well-set hair baldness. So from a woman or people who adorn themselves with this gorgeous hair and loves their hair, baldness. And so this is what he's continuing when he comes into verse 1 and saying, and then this is kind of an interesting, we'll expound upon it a little. He says, and 7 women shall take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach. Now he's describing this condition. That's why I said you have to almost look back up at 3 and see what he's saying. And this is a link. That's why I say this is one of the most terrible divisions, because that has to be linked with it when he says, because you look at 26 of chapter 3, and her gates shall lament and mourn, empty. She shall sit on the ground, and 7 women shall take hold, going into 4, one man in that day. What we have is despair, and this idea of 7 men to one man, in this day, the judgment is going to come, not literal. This is not literally 7 men, 7 women to one man. What is the number 7? Completeness. So this complete desperation. And this idea that these women are in desperation because of the fact of their husbands are gone, or there's no men for them to have that security. One of the key factors of this societal setting was security comes from being married and having, a lineage, having children. Now, The desperation is not just the 7 women are going to marry, but they're saying, you don't even have to provide for us. We'll bring our own food. We have food. We'll bring our own clothes. All we need is we need the security of that bond with a man, with that name. Now, it sounds chauvinistic, but that is a very desperate picture if you're a Hebrew reading this letter. That is something that is just horrific to listen to think that that's how bad it would be with these women would be begging somebody to just let me have your name so we can have children. So that's kind of the reproach that they want removed so they can have it. So that is a curse, that's the conditions of desolation and desperation that's going to be going on. And then verse 2, Isaiah says, and in that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. What a stark picture. Going from this total desolation and destruction and everybody in such ill situation that all of a sudden, but in that day, there's this branch. It's going to be beautiful and glorious. Everything else around it is desolation and destruction. But this one branch is all of a sudden going to be glorious. You'd be going, well, what? I mean, you remember the images of 9/11 in New York and how horrific it was? The smoldering that went on for days and the desolation that was around. Can you imagine, to put that in your mind, and then imagine all of a sudden in the middle, there's this amazing, beautiful plant that's come up that is the most gorgeous plant in the middle of all that desolation. It would just blow your mind. You'd sit there and go, how could that be in the middle of these conditions? That's kind of what he's drawn a picture of. Is in the middle of this horrific conditions that there is something beautiful and glorious that's going to come. That is something that has always fascinated me about what God has done in his judgment. We started out with the most gorgeous, perfect world there could ever be, earth. I mean, it was perfect. I mean, then all of a sudden sin comes along and God has to bring his judgment. And that is utter, horrific, catastrophic destruction. But yet in that, have you ever been to the Grand Canyon? You ever looked at some of the things that we go out and we go, look at those mountains. I mean, just go out here and look at the Oregons. Go to the Grand Canyon. When I go up to the cliff dwellings and I look as I'm hiking through those canyons and I look up and I'm standing there going, that is incredible. And then all of a sudden, I remember one day as I was hiking, I stopped and I went, why? Well, God created it. Why? It wasn't like that when God created the earth. But it was through his judgment that brought about this catastrophic disaster. But even in that, what came out? A beautiful earth that we get to enjoy. And we go look at the Grand Canyon. We go look at some of these marvels of the physical world and just go, look how gorgeous that is. And yet it's why? It's because of God's judgment. Something beautiful came out of it. That's what he's showing. It's necessary. But even in his wrath and destruction, something so amazing is still going to come out about it. And in the middle of all of that, this branch will come up. And this is where he says, and the fruit of the land. In that destruction, what is fruitful? What would be left? So let's talk about this day. When we think about this, if you're listening, he's speaking specifically to those people, and they're looking at historically Babylon coming in and destroying the temple and burning the place to the ground and taking a group of captives off and taking them off to Babylon, and they're going to stay there for approximately 70 years, and then they're going to return, and it's going to be total devastation that they're going to have to start and rebuild. and start the second temple. And so in that this is a part of the vision that he is showing them, that the destruction and everything, that Lord is going to take a remnant and he is going to spare them and protect them and take them off the land. And they're going to come back. And when they come back, the land is going to be ready. And the fruit that's going to come from that is what is going to be wonderful. And so, but he says, look, the survivors of Israel. Now, remember, there's always a shadow of something way toward the future. If you've listened so far and you pick up, you hear this, the branch of the Lord, the branch, the root of Jesse, the branch of Jesse and David, King David. You start to go, well, we know this is really talking about Jesus, the Messiah. So this is where you have the two messages. One directly to them that I just described about going to Babylon, coming back and rebuilding, but there's something greater. And that's looking towards the kingdom that this Messiah would bring and that would finally come. And so he says, survivors of Israel. This is really a part of the result of when the second temple would be destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. So you have the Babylonians who are going to come, and there's a judgment coming upon them, direct message, Isaiah is saying, and that's going to destroy them, but they're going to come back. And there's going to be a part of the root, but part of the promise, coming and rebuilding the second temple. But there's also then this kingdom that's going to come that Daniel prophesied about in this new covenant relationship, but there's going to be the destruction of that temple, but through the end of that, the destruction of that, something beautiful is coming in this greater kingdom. And so when you say survivors of Israel, a lot of times we forget about the fact that we as Christians are a part of that new Israel, those who are chosen. And this is what Paul says in Romans chapter 2, and he says in 28, the Jew is one inwardly, for no one is a Jew who is merely outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly. Circumcision is not a matter of the heart. What is it by? The Spirit, not by the letter. There's something greater about the relationship, and Paul's talking to us New Testament Christians that this is a part of those who are of the faith of Abraham, who are really the spiritual Israel. And so this is also pointing towards the fulfillment of this. This holiness, this setting apart, he talks about in verse 3. And he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem. And so that's a part where, as well, has two meanings, because looking at the fact that those who are going to come back are going to be set apart. Not everybody returned. Remember, there's thousands and thousands that just stayed. They never came back. Those who came back and started to rebuild out of Babylon were really the holy and set apart and the more righteous ones that were there. And this is really kind of this description, Zechariah. Now, Zechariah prophesied after they came back and when they returned and they were rebuilding the second temple. And this is where, in this vision about where the high priest is standing there in this vision, and God talking to the adversary, Satan, he says, and the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked from the fire? This is the remnant, in other words. You are standing here, Joshua, the high priest, and rebuking and trying to bring an accusation. Zechariah, now remember, like I said, this is when they've already come back. Isaiah is talking about how they're going to be sent off, but there is a remnant, there's a group, there's a protected group that's going to come back. And this is where he describes it, Zechariah, saying, this is God's remnant that's here now. So you have no right to that. And as well, when we look further down, when the kingdom has come in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22, this is a description of Zion. He says, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. This is the spiritual. This is where, when the Hebrew writer is trying to show them the difference between the covenant and how it came, and how that when it came, it was a fearful thing, that they stood at the foot of the mountain and there was don't come near the mountain or you'll die. And then when God came down, there's lightning and fire and all this going on, and the people were terrified at that mountain. And he's saying, that's not what we have done in Hebrews. He's saying, no, we have come to Mount Zion. And that's exactly kind of the relationship where we see where Isaiah is pointing out about this second one vision that he's applying to, that Jesus the Messiah would be coming to. And again, Paul talks about this remnant in Romans 11, this foreshadowing again that Isaiah, and linking it into the New Testament. He said, so too at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace. In 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. All of these are tagging and linking back and showing the fulfillment of what Isaiah is talking about here in Isaiah chapter 4 in this idea. And we've talked about this, but this idea, this cleansing work. And through that branch, that beautiful branch, but he comes back again and shows this idea of this cleansing work of what God's going to accomplish and for. When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the bloodstains of Jerusalem from its midst by a spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. Through a horrible situation, God will cleanse. And that's something that will happen. Malachi, mentions it well, talks about this. Who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and a fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. And he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver. And they will bring offerings in his righteousness to the Lord. Malachi, he was the last prophet. So again, here's Malachi, the last prophet before the Messiah comes, looking at this idea of, and this fits again with the same thinking of what Isaiah is pointing to, the further vision of looking at this kingdom that's coming. And it's very fitting, because look what Paul says when he describes this in 1 Corinthians 6:11. And some of you were such were some of you, but you were washed. You were sanctified. You were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of the Lord. And what he said, some were you, he describes all the sinful things and conditions that people were doing. And he says, but you've been refined in a sense. You've been changed. And this is a part of the judgment, but accepting that judgment and the beautiful result of what it's done. God's judgment will always produce something very beautiful. And in that, those people, even those that were going to go off into Babylon, again, the direct application of Isaiah talking to them and what's going to happen in Babylon, but look what he's talking about. It's something very fitting to all of God's children, is this idea of God's protection and his presence. Then the Lord will create over the whole site of the Mount Zion and over the assemblies a cloud by day and smoke and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a canopy. There will be a booth for shade by day from the heat, and for a refuge and a shelter from the storm and rain. Doesn't that sound very familiar? When he says a cloud by day and smoke and shining of a flaming fire by night. Sound very familiar, like something that happened historically? Yeah, exactly. When God brought his people out of captivity, what did he do? How did he block Pharaoh's army? He blocked them by a tower of fire, a pillar of fire, blocked them. And he was constantly with them, demonstrating to them that he was there with them and that he was protecting them. And this is a beautiful, beautiful imagery. You know, when you think about what he is going to do, and this is over in Exodus 21 and 22. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them among the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, and they might travel by day and by night. And a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. And this is this type of a canopy, this wall that Zechariah describes again. I will be a wall, I will be to her a wall of fire around, all around, declares the Lord, and I will be the glory in her midst. And this is a beautiful imagery of, even though, again, through this terrible judgment, because of what we have done, what the children of Israel have done, God is still going to protect his remnant and provide that place. That's why I love Psalms 91. It fits so well for us as well in Psalms 91, 1 and 2. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. So that's chapter 4. Kind of short, kind of fast, but it helps to tie in, like I said, the greater message as he starts to break out. But those short little verses set forward all of what Isaiah is then going to expound upon as he goes forward. So next week we'll be in 5. And if you're here with us this evening and we can help you in any way in your relationship with God, I hope that you would let us know while we stand and sing.
Take my life.